Well, welcome, Zach, and thank you for joining me on this trip down memory lane. Though it's not our memories, but the shared memories of the hypnotherapists of times past. It's like the Ghost of Christmas Past, you know, the little girl who shows up in your room, terrorizes you while you sleep. You know,
is that it?
Yeah, the Christmas story, Christmas Carol? You've seen A Christmas Carol, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, am I breaking this cultural news to you?
She's just never showed up in my room.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
She's usually pretty scary for me, though.
This last weekend, we were talking to some people in St. Augustine about all the ghost tours and stuff like that. They're
Huge
like,
space.
Do you believe in it? I was, yeah. And I was like, I have a hard time believing in ghosts though, because I feel like I'd be the one that they would present themselves to. Weird, eccentric, cool with talking to dead people.
Yeah.
And I can listen pretty well. I mean, I've been trained in it.
You're a trained listener.
And if they're like stuck in this plane because they got to get over something, like, I'd be the ideal person for them to talk to.
It's kind of true. I don't think they could pay your bill, though.
I would do it for free.
Wow.
Yeah.
Out of the kindness of your heart.
And no ghosts have ever presented themselves to me.
Well, if you want to go fund Zach's GoFundMe, his Patreon page, his nonprofit 501c3, Ghosts Therapy R Us.
That's my OnlyFans.
That's your OnlyFans. That's it. Subscribe and you can support Zach's ghost therapy business. The undead need help too.
Videos of me not talking to ghosts.
It's just like an hour-long video of you sitting there.
$9.99.
I buy it. If you opt for the premium subscription, can I choose what hat you wear while you do it?
You could be my exclusive VIP.
Oh my god. You do like little fan excursions. You're like, okay, we're gonna organize a trip to St. Augustine.
Meetups.
They're meetups. Influencer culture. It's great. But today we're talking about the original influencers of hypnotherapy. We're going all the way back. We're going to explain some stuff about why hypnotherapy fell out of favor in the United States, why it's a little bit more popular overseas, some of the origins for where it came from, far beyond like modern scientific theory, and walk you through some of the stuff because a solid foundation in history explains the sentiment of why we got here. It's context. Context is key. And so, at least for me, I mean, we've been doing hypnotic stuff, you know, staring into the fire and thinking about our feelings since time immemorial. But I think I really like to pin it down and start it with, and maybe this is where I'm a little bit more versed, at least in this piece, of the ancient Egyptian sleep temples.
Well, and let's just be clear, we're going to talk about some things that are historical.
Yes.
But just because we're talking about these specific things doesn't mean that this is the exclusive use of hypnosis in ancient history.
Oh, true.
It crosses every culture. There are things that are hypnotic and trance-oriented in every historical... anytime we have a historical account for people, there is this.
There is hypnosis.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you think about like coming of age rituals, deeply hypnotic and symbolistic. Rife with symbolism. How about that? You know, you think about the way that the town shaman or the medicine man, medicine woman would be in charge of that hypnotic experience to heal both psychological and physical problems. And so I think the reason that I start with the ancient Egyptians is because it's at least in my head, the first time that we see sort of documentation about hypnotherapy in a large set social group.
Right.
It's like, I mean, the Egyptians were highly structured. There's a big political system. There was a big economic system. And so you kind of see this hypnosis in there. And it's probably the easiest to point to. A lot of the others are a little bit more anecdotal.
And we're inferring stuff about it too.
Yeah, we're inferring stuff because we weren't there, you know. But the ancient Egyptians kept great records, you know, with you know, they mentioned papyrus and hieroglyphics and all that stuff. And so we can see what they did based on their documentation, where sometimes the documentation is lacking, and we have to kind of gather clues from archaeology and like what remains we're digging up from them. So it's a little bit more speculative.
Yeah.
But with the Egyptians, it's pretty clear. They talked about it in their work. And so, anyway, starting with the ancient Egyptians, what they would do, and this aligns a lot with my dream work. They would be priests, right? And the priests would, be in charge of these temples inside, their city. And when somebody had a problem that was more on the spiritual side of things, you had doctors and stuff, but if it was more of a spiritual problem, which back in that time, spirituality and psychology were, the same thing.
Yeah.
They would address emotional problems from a spiritual lens, and I think in that time that made the most sense. Yeah. And so you'd go to, you'd have a problem, right? Can't get over my ex. Relatable. You go talk to the priest. And what the priest would do is they would have a ceremony. They'd have a ceremony, you'd drink some herbs, they would do some chanting, they'd say some pre-written scripts, much like our hypnotherapy scripts today. And it was deeply hypnotic. They would go through this sequence of steps. They would have you, kind of consume something, bring something in, like some herbs, some medicine, and then you would go further into the temple, into the sleep chamber. And what you do is there was this, like, kind of almost like altar-looking thing, a bed, and you would lie down on the bed, and the solution to your spiritual or psychological problem would come to you during a nap. Which, man, if we could reintroduce that into our counseling practice,
I was gonna say,
I'd be all for it.
That's what I did on Friday.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. If you haven't tried it this holiday season, give it a whirl. I think you're in for a wonderful time. But that's what they would do, and so the hypnosis was in the beginning, and throughout that hypnosis, there are several key steps, right. And so one of the key steps is setting intention and anticipation. Right, I'm going to go talk to the priest. This is a very important person. They wear these traditional garments. They've been trained and dedicated their whole life to this, much like a counselor or a hypnotherapist, much like the interesting clothes and hairstyles that we choose to embrace.
I don't know anything about that.
I don't know. It's okay. I'll explain it to you some other time. And so that's setting the preparation. Then you would have the depotentiation, which is like, what weird thing are they saying? Like, what are they doing? And then you got
magic.
Yeah. And so you go deeper and you go deeper and suggest, and then physical representation of going deeper into the chamber, and then you kind of go to sleep, right? It was a hypnotic sleep, kind of like a formal trance that we do today, and the answer would come to you. You go inside yourself. And so, when people talk about newer modalities of therapy like EMDR and ART that have only been around for a little bit, I don't think people recognize really just how deep hypnosis and hypnotherapy go as a tried and true method. Now, of course, it's different now because we've done research and we've grown as human beings and a species and scientifically. And so we've got some alternate ways of doing things that are more effective now.
Yeah. It's a little less crude.
Yeah, but the foundation has been there forever. Just like the way they go into physical therapy, and like running and moving your body has been around since as long as humans have been around too. So that is the ancient Egyptian sleep temples, and that's sort of where I start with that conversation about history.
And where my head goes is just like, sorry, wrong finger.
Oh yeah.
I would love to go see those things, and then the thing that comes up in my head is
that
like
would be cool,
right?
A trip?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Stay
tuned.
Right. And the reason why is because of how entrancing that would be to be in that situation, to see all of that, the get up, the theatricalness, the dogma behind it, and all of that stuff that is just like, there's so much there that I don't know how it's not hypnotic.
No.
And so, as far as just thinking like of like the scene and the feel of like the original Mummy.
Oh yeah.
The movie.
Yeah.
And then being
great.
like
Brendan Fraser.
Yeah, we're gonna go into a trance with you guys.
Hell yeah. Yeah. I made a note here talking about incense too. some aromatherapy, which, us therapists will put, the essential oils in the little mister in our office, and that's like a great way to kind of initiate it too. I mean, or, the leftover cheeseburger that I ate right before you walked in. Both entrancing. I mean, I'm just saying.
I was going to say, or when Grace farts. I love
That's his therapy,
yeah,
by the way.
the watching a client that doesn't really know us very well, like a new client, just be like I can see that inside their head they're going, that smells so terrible, don't say anything. That smells so terrible, don't say anything. That smells so terrible, don't say anything.
So good.
And I'm sitting here going like, listening to him, talking to him, knowing like it smells like shit.
And they say, and you'll take a deep breath. No, I'm teasing.
You'll feel the air entering into your lungs.
And it'll feel different. You might notice an aroma. No, that's a joke. That's a joke. I don't gas clients with therapy dog fart.
Oh gosh.
But from there, a little bit of a break in it. Maybe we can have a separate kind of conversations about the Greeks and the Romans and a lot of that stuff. But we'll skip ahead and get to the stuff that's a little bit more modern age, and Franz Mesmer and the birth of mesmerism, which really is the term that predates hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Right? It came from mesmerism. And so there's this guy, and there's Franz Mesmer.
Mesmerize.
Yeah, it's where we get the term mesmerized. Right? And so he believed in, and jump in at any time if you've got some things to add, but he believed in what was called animal magnetism. And so at this point in history and science, they were just kind of figuring out magnets.
Just kind of feel kinkish when you say it like that.
Animal magnetism?
Yeah.
It does sound romantic.
Yeah.
Yeah. He or she has this animal magnetism about them.
I bet you there's something to that. Like thinking about it from the perspective, like the hypnosis is very animalistic.
Well, I mean, you may be spoiling the plot, but
sorry.
We're going to talk about Sigmund Freud here in a minute in sexual libido theory that leads into hypnosis. So you're not wrong. They were leading into that. And so Mesmer, unfortunately, I think overstepped his lane, and he dabbled in areas that were kind of beyond what he could really support with good proof. And so Mesmer believed in animal magnetism. Magnets were a big kind of understanding at that time in science. And so he believed that, human beings have a magnetic field, which they do. But he believed that when somebody experienced a psychological condition, there was a misalignment of their magnetism. And he believed that through these certain practices and techniques, that he could realign the magnetism inside of a person, and that would heal their psychological ailments. And so he had this, special stick that he would kind of wave around, and it looked like a magic wand, but it was more like I think of like a Rafiki staff from The Lion King. Squash banana, oh yeah. That's from Lion
Which is
King.
very hypnotic too.
Yeah. I love that scene. And then that's such a good one too. He just squash banana, and then whack.
It's in the past.
What does it matter? It's in the past. Sometimes it does feel like our job, doesn't it? And then Simba's chasing through the bramble bushes, and Rafiki's jumping through and just keeps hitting him in the head. Sometimes we need that. We get in our own way. Then you collapse on the edge of the cliff and you look up at the stars and you're like, oh, this is a lot simpler than I'm making it out to be. Franz Mesmer.
Very hypnotic.
Franz Mesmer. And so the downfall, though, was, he combined this very mystical practice with some notes of the scientific community. And so, of course, at that time, Benjamin Franklin had to get involved. And so it was this big showdown, Jerry Springer style, where they brought them both in. And, this is the beginning stages of America. And so they brought them in front of this big, group of great minds and great thinkers and scientific, engineers. And they had it out. And so Mesmer explained his theories and how he thought it worked. And Benjamin Franklin sits there, and he thinks about it, and then the story goes, he goes over and he breaks his staff, his magic staff. He just busts it in half, because he said that was the tool with which he aligned the magnetism.
Kind of.
And it was this way that he was challenging. He was well, based on what you said, you should still be able to do it. And then he couldn't do it.
Right.
You know, because there's a magic, you know, a placebo effect to it essentially. And so, you know, Benjamin Franklin's big push was, yeah, you're having results, but what you're saying is causing the results is not what's actually causing the results.
Right.
And so I love that metaphor of the conscious mind confronting the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is like, well, I don't know why, but it works. The conscious mind is like, well, we need to know why it works, and both are right.
Yep. Well, I mean, going back to that, like, it kind of is the staff, because, you know, one of the basic things that you need in hypnosis is some sort of pedestal for the person that is doing the hypnosis. You got to be the professional. You got to be the priest. You got to be the archetype of the priest. You know, the shaman, and because the hypnotherapist is that, the client automatically goes into a pedestaling of that. Like, you're going to be doing this thing. I'm not going to be doing anything to you. You're the professional. Yes, of what I do, not of you.
Right.
And you know, you get your staff broken in front of that. How depotentiating is that for everybody that's watching? Like, you're not going to be able to do hypnosis in that situation.
I hate it when my staff breaks when I'm trying to perform.
Right.
There's a pill for that now.
There's a couple of them.
There's a few. Depends on which gas station you stop at.
Or
I'm a Shell guy.
or whatever your Instagram.
Also, yeah. Whatever the TikTok for you page has decided. But it was this big moment. All of these cases where the placebo effect of Franz Mesmer, along with some real practical hypnotherapy, techniques, kind of fell apart because he couldn't support it with facts. And so it is this moment of like, well, it's important that we understand why and how we're doing works. And so I do think, though, that moment, because nobody came along and said, well, hey, here's how it actually works, and like, let's look deeper into this. It was just like, that's placebo, it's bogus, I think led to the dismissal of hypnosis in the United States. And so from there, 18th century, kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
And so we really didn't see, at least in my understanding, we really didn't see it picked up again until Sigmund Freud. So we go back to Europe now. We're back in Europe, and Franz Mesmer was in Europe too. But Benjamin Franklin in the U.S., actually had this commission to investigate Mesmer. It was the whole thing.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, right. It sounds very American, doesn't it? But then we get my old boy Sigmund Freud.
Siggy.
And Sigmund Freud was kind of the first to go back into that scientific community and thought and start to put words to why what works did work. And so he created the model that we all know and love. We often learn in like high school psychology 101, and especially in psychology in college, of the id, the ego, and the superego. Brief review: the id is our animal drives and desires. The superego is our social pressure and moral and ethical pressure, and the ego is the self in between that chooses how to balance those two. Right? So it's like, well, this person cut me off in traffic. I want to kill them. Society says that that's bad and I'll go to jail. So I'll flip them off. So that's a great example, right? My animal instincts wants to murder them. Society says don't. So I'll balance the two and I'll flip them the bird and call it a day.
Anna Freud is rolling over in her grave right now. You're right, but she would want to have to say a lot more about that.
Wait, tell me more. I'm oversimplifying?
Yeah.
That's great.
I'm thinking about like the biggest advocate for Freudian work is not Sigmund Freud, but Anna Freud.
The daughter.
Yeah, Anna's daughter.
By the way, interesting stuff.
And she's like, no, we gotta go to or the version of her in my head is like, no, we need to have a lecture about this, and so part 2 will be all about Freudian psychoanalysis now.
That's great if that's your thing.
I think a lot of it's great.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I appreciate about Freud the most is also the part that leaves Sigmund Freud the most misunderstood, and that is his sexual libido theory.
Yeah.
And so everyone memes on Freud now on the internet because it's like, oh, tell me about your mother, right? right? Cigar is not just a cigar. But they don't understand Freud in the context of society in which he lived.
Right.
At that time, this was very Victorian.
It was the capital of Victorian culture.
Yes.
Was Vienna.
Right, exactly.
Like the hub of it.
Vienna.
The most like restrictive, just I need to put a mask on, and quite literally makeup was more of a mask than it was makeup.
Yeah, the pompous dresses and pantaloons and the wigs and the face full of makeup, caked on makeup, was from that. There was a barrier between all the issues that were plaguing me and my health and the way I'm presenting myself to the world. So very Victorian, right? We were in this big push against our animal ancestry. And so we had to show our distinction from our animalism by being very set apart from the natural world. And that was the thrust of, pun intended,
nice,
of that time. And so here's Sigmund Freud, right? A doctor at the time, beset with the task of explaining mental health and psychological conditions at a time where there was no terminology or language to describe or discuss those things.
And not only that, it was also like that there was, preposterous physical attributes to mental and psychological things.
Oh yeah.
Just like ridiculous things, like your vagina is upside down, and that's why you're behaving this way. like just ridiculous stuff.
Yeah.
That was because they needed a medical physiological explanation.
Everything was concrete.
Yeah.
So Freud did something brilliant and genius, and this is why he still holds a special place in psychology, because what he did is he was able to describe and explain psychological conditions by connecting them with a physical property of sexuality. And it really was just this window and this avenue to begin the discussion about psychology at an age that would have totally rejected it otherwise. So by connecting it with physical sexuality, we're able to start that discussion. And Freud did, he's criticized for kind of plagiarizing and pulling from other people, but he did credit all of them in his books.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he was like the Google page of the time. He pulled in all of these other people's work into one big book, many books, that was able to describe it.
And not only that, just like the personnel aspects to what he was doing with the Institute in Vienna.
Yeah.
There was so much of doctors who whatever jokes we're going to be. That's just a theory.
Well, yeah, recent papers just this year about how memories are stored in muscle tissue now. Mm-hmm. We have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We know a lot, and we know some things for sure, but there's still so much left to be understood.
And even that's like black box theory, because it's like the muscles are stored memories are stored in muscle tissue. Like, how? Is there a filing cabinet? Like a really small one? we don't know that information right now. We just know that it can kind of happen in this one way.
We're still testing around it.
But so I think that it's healthy to be like, hey, I have a theory about this, but like I don't know, and I'm not going to be dogmatic about making sure that everybody else thinks that I do 100% know what the...
Yeah. And I think in this transition from Freud to Jung to Erikson, we're seeing the release of Victorian dogma into permissive experience.
Yeah.
And Milton moved into that so much more with a lot of the informal trance that we talk about in the trauma-focused hypnotherapy course, which is storytelling and conversation and unique interactions and novel expressions.
So a little bit of a side note, but we have a colleague named Adam, and I bought this card deck that is inspirations and education about storytelling and effective storytelling.
Okay.
And I wanted to give it to Adam. Adam said, I already have that, so I kept it and I'm looking through it. And it's in my office, and one of my interns last week goes, "Why do you have cards on storytelling?" And I was like, "I'm so sorry I failed you so badly."
That's a very odd question. I feel like as your intern, they would have.
They're new, but also like that's pretty foundational.
That's elementary.
If you can't tell good stories and you're not working on your storytelling ability, go home. I don't know.
Try again.
Start
Try
over.
again. I mean, gosh, that's the way that human beings have been sharing psychological information since the beginning, is stories.
And in my opinion, one of the most effective trance-inducing tools that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know if I have anything else to say about Erickson that could fit in this podcast. I think that's a pretty good thing.
I know. When we were talking about like what to say in this, and just like, okay, sum up Freud.
Oh wow, we're gonna have to blitz through that. I think the last thing I will say about Erickson is just to add one piece in the sequence of historical steps is one of the proteges of Erickson was Siegel, and Siegel wrote and explained NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And so you can kind of see the story arc from Victorian dogma into black box, and then Siegel takes it back into, well, let's start to make it a little bit more specific again. And so what Siegel did was he told Erickson that he should write a book, and Erickson said, "I just really don't care to do that. You write it. I won't ask for anything from it." And so Siegel's like, he actually told several people to do that, and Siegel was the only one to actually be like, "Bet, I'll do it." You know, and so Siegel followed him around.
I'm sure he did.
That's exactly how. Bet, I got it. And so Siegel followed him around and like documented all the stories and tracked all of the things that he was doing, because a lot of the things that Erickson did, he just knew that they worked. He didn't know why they worked. Black box theory. And so Siegel wrote them all down and then created this theory of neuro-linguistic programming, which is to say that each word that a person uses is a linguistic technique that interfaces with your neurology to create a programming, NLP. So it's like, I'm saying these words, those words carry a certain weight that will reprogram the way that you think. And so he created a much more structured system based on what Erickson was doing, but they're very similar, very similar. And so we get into that in the course as well. And those type A people in our class very much enjoy NLP because of how structured it is.
Yeah,
it's really great. A lot of the hypnotic scripts that you'll download online or like look up come from the more structured NLP sort of model. Yeah. So from there, we get into this weird space of, hypnotherapy still holding on. It's written into the laws now, and in our legislature, and people are still practicing it, but it's not widespread. And then we start to enter into what I've encountered modern day on social media, which is modern metaphysics and conversations about the astral plane. And in our last couple of minutes of this podcast episode, I want to tie it into there, which I think you see is the full cycle of the story arc from Mesmer to Freud to Jung to Erickson to Siegel, back to now we're just saying stuff that we're making up, and we're given reasons for things that nobody can support.
Joseph Campbell would be so happy with this story arc.
It's so good, right?
If you don't know who Joseph Campbell is, and
storytelling.
Yeah. Go look him up.
That's the hero with 1,000 faces, right?
The Hero's Way.
The Hero's Way.
The Hero's Journey.
The Hero's Journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, in case you've seen this stuff, I'm sure you've run across it online. There's all this spiritual stuff about, you'll see on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube about people communicating with their energies and using the rods that kind of connect together and asking questions through pendulums to spirits, and these conversations about connecting with the astral plane. And so for anybody who's not familiar, and maybe to talk to you, because you're like, Jesse, you're on social media, I don't know what that is. this idea of the astral plane is this very silly New Age idea that is just a regurgitation of Jung's understanding of the collective unconscious. So this belief that there is this astral plane, and when we sleep, we all connect with the astral plane, and those who are aware and introspective enough can intentionally connect with the astral plane, and you can kind of cross over into other people's consciousness and their dreams and communicate with them, and you can connect with your higher self, your more authentic being, which would be, like mana persona and stuff like that. And it's this same concept that Jung talked about ages ago of the collective unconscious, but it's from a very spiritual lens.
It's also from a very conscious lens, like the way that you describe that. And again, I don't know too much about it.
Yeah.
But the way that you just described it is like I can use my conscious mind to connect with this thing that's totally unconscious.
Yeah, kind of through your dreams and stuff. Through dreams, through meditation, through different somatic experiences.
I don't know that I'd be that rigid about it. Like that creates a lot of problematic rigidity.
Well, it's back to animal magnetism.
Yeah.
It's this element of truth that we know from Jung and psychology, but then that one grain of truth is taken and all these assumptions are made without any backing to it. And so I think the biggest thing, I've dabbled a lot in dream work, obviously, and I'm gonna forget his name now, but there's an incredible researcher on lucid dreaming, and I'm gonna have to put in the show notes because of course it escapes me right now. But he talked about how a lot in the lucid dreaming community believe that lucid dreaming is the way to connect with the astral plane, and he was very dogmatic about. I fundamentally, systematically disagree with that.
I really disagree with it too.
Because, and his point was, if you believe in the astral plane, it's this interface that allows other things to come into your consciousness.
Sure. About this, but the medical field was very dominated in Austria by a Jewish population, and the thing that has been a struggle for Jewish people across Europe, across the world, but this one most particularly is like, hey, you can come in and you can treat us, but we're still going to look at you as a lower class, and that, not to get too, we'll circle back to this maybe, but that's really Jung's contribution to all of this. Also, being
Jung is coming next.
A white Christian character that corroborated everything, and also had so Freud very much had the institution for clinicians, and Jung had the institute for patients.
Yes.
And at the Bergholz, and was able to do a lot of research, very early psychological research. But I also don't want to get ahead of myself. I think it's important to note that there was just a large group of thinkers that were people that all kind of aligned underneath Freud, that at the end it became very dogmatic, and it was very much what Freud says goes.
Right.
But it started off, I think, in a really healthy way of we need to design scientific methods of proving these things to be correct.
Scientific methods of treatment.
Yeah.
This is really where we start to get into evidence-backed treatment modalities. And so that is the next part of this conversation, is sort of the blend from Freud into Jung. And you see this big transition there, because as Freud developed in his career, he became very dogmatic about libido theory. And even in some of his works and letters between Jung and Freud, because Jung was a protege of Freud, he studied under Freud. And some of their letters back and forth, as they kind of moved from pupil to peer, Freud started to say, we have to protect and uphold libido theory at all costs. And Jung confronted him, appropriately so, and I'm grateful for it, saying we can't put the theory above what we're seeing as actually working.
The science.
We have to, again, follow the evidence-backed methods. And so I know that you've got libido theory, but we have to look at what's really happening. And so then we start to see the balance of power shift a little bit from Freud to Jung, as Jung took a more holistic and integrative approach, and Freud descended into dogma. And there are still people like who are very dogmatic about Freudian libido, hypnotherapy, and psychoanalysis.
Yeah, I got to see it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna let. I mean, you're the most versed in Jung, and I'll add some stuff too. But could you talk about what you did see in that transition and start a conversation about Jung?
Oh goodness.
What did you notice? I'd love for you to talk about your personal experience. Because you studied in Switzerland.
Yeah. In Geneva, not Zurich, just to be clear.
Yeah. And Zurich was Jung. Jung was in Zurich.
Yeah. Well, outside.
But you were in Geneva.
And the Jung Institute is in Zurich.
Yeah.
The 30,000 foot. And as far as hypnosis too, Freud, I worked through a process, had a process, did that process. That's how the process always was.
Mm-hmm.
It did work, and like the hypnotic aspects of that, he got a reputation, and so then people were training themselves to be hypnotized by Freud and his colleagues because of the standardized methods. Before they even got into his office, they were just hypnotized. Oh, he's gonna have a pendulum. He's gonna have a stopwatch. He's gonna go back and forth. That's where we get a lot of that from. Is
the modern EMDR stuff came from Freud.
Freud.
Yeah.
I remember the face that I got from a very dogmatic EMDR person. I was like, it's hypnosis. They're like, it's not hypnosis. We go back and forth about how it's hypnosis and it's not hypnosis. And I in my office I had like a sand pendulum.
I know the one.
And I was like, all right, so like I like pulled it out. I started doing this, and I was just like, would this work for EMDR? Like, what would you say? And I was just like, you know what? I need to trade this pendulum for a stopwatch. And then I just like held it, and I was going like this, and the person's face was like,
you saw the light bulb finally go off,
and I was just like, how did you not recognize this?
How did you miss this? Hypnosis. They were hypnotized by EMDR.
That's exactly what it was.
They bought in, but that's what made Freud so effective. Is they bought in like, it's Sigmund Freud. Oh my God, he's gonna fix everything. And so there's so much to be said about the anticipatory properties and value that's added to the therapeutic experience just because of the belief that there's magical powers vested in this creature.
And I think that's the big leap that was made with Jung, is that because instead of it being like, you know, the signs and symbols, the book that really, the history behind it was the book that really was like, hey Freud, you're wrong, but I know that I'm not allowed to tell you that you're wrong.
Yeah.
And it basically talks about how we look at all of these things as signs in the psyche. This means this. And it's much more of a symbol that we need to explore about what this means to that person. And so with that kind of innovation, the hypnosis had to go from this is how we do everything and this is what these things mean to let's put this person in, instead of a directive state of trance, a permissive state of trance and see what happens.
Yes.
And Jung also studied the old religions, spent some time in Asia and Africa, but really focusing in on like where fundamental human archetypes come from. And I think that from a hypnotic perspective, if you're paying attention to those archetypes, you have to pay attention to the unconscious mind, and when the unconscious mind pops up when we're even awake, and not just in dreams.
And that's the big distinction is, you know, Freud got lost in trying to explain repressions and the different types of what do you call those? The different kinds of, like, you know, pushback we get from clients, the different things that their brain does to try and cope. And it started to get really complicated because he was trying to make it all fit in his libido theory framework. And Jung's like, we're forcing this too hard.
Just let it be.
And so Jung did the very noble thing and left Switzerland, traveled the world looking at different cultures and trying to understand and see how they address the same problem to create a unified theory. And then that is where Jung's works came from his, deep experience across the globe, interacting with all different kinds of humans to create that unified theory. And that's where we get Jungian psychoanalysis, which I think is really where we can start to say that's the basis of trauma-focused hypnotherapy.
Yeah.
We're integrating some other stuff that even comes after Jung, which we'll talk about here in a second. But that's really kind of the beginning point of modern hypnotherapy for us.
And I think that he brought it down to such a fundamental level that it was so, for lack of better words, like not all-encompassing, but foundational.
Yeah.
I guess. Simple, but it wasn't simple.
It wasn't simple, but it was transcendent.
Transcendent is a really great word.
Yeah.
And that all of these other theoretical orientations could be built off of that. I think that was kind of his goal, is to create something that everybody could take and like do it themselves. He was even quoted as saying, like, there shouldn't be a Jungian psychoanalysis. Don't call it that. It should be like your psychoanalysis, and your psychoanalysis, and your psychoanalysis, and everybody should take what he does what he created and make it their own.
Right. Which I think is a great segue and transition into Milton Erickson.
Yeah.
Because we have a theoretical foundation in Jungian psychoanalysis, which is kind of a silly term because he didn't want anybody to call it that.
It's ironic.
It is very ironic, but he's very, very revered and respected. But I think the evidence of his transcendence, his desire to create a unified theory, is contemporary of his. There's overlap in the days in which they lived, but completely separate was Milton Erickson. And so Ericksonian hypnosis, also another individual who's like, you shouldn't call it Ericksonian.
Yep.
He's like, you should make it your own, which I think is so cool about those two. There's no, as far as I know, there's no real evidence that they had conversations or even met or conversed together, but they arrived at similar conclusions.
And they would certainly be aware of each other's work.
They would have been aware of each other's work at the time, yeah. But there's no evidence that they spoke together at conferences or something.
Hung out.
Yeah, and they never got coffee together and
Cigar.
a cigar.
Smoked in Freud's sake.
Yeah. And so Erickson really brought to the conversation a much more conversational type of hypnosis. Where Jung was the son of a pastor and very much involved in theory, Milton Erickson arrived at similar conclusions, but was very staunch about his belief that hypnosis was atheoretical. And so his contribution was, hypnosis transcends theory. We don't need a theory. It's just a principle. And that's so simple to say, but it's such a complex and important thing to distinguish between the two. Erickson really didn't care about the theory of why it worked.
Yeah.
He was, a doctor, and he cared about science, but he's like, this is just a principle. Just in the way that, there's the principle of gravity or relativity, right? And then you apply that in your theory of the universe. Hypnosis is a principle that then he expected people to take and apply individually and uniquely to their therapeutic work.
And just a more detail to that too is Milton is also coming around in America at a time where... True,
he's American. That's different.
Yeah, where science was very much like, if we can't explain it, then we're not going to touch that thing, especially when it comes to mental health. And so there's the idea that was coming up, the mind is the black box, is you put data in and you see what comes out. I don't care about the black box, because science, which I get, which is good, especially when it comes to like Freudian stuff, is like, if we don't understand it, we don't have the technology or the theory to really put our finger on it and know everything about it, then let's test around it.
Right. That's such a great way to put it. I don't know if I've ever heard or digested it being said that way, of Milton treating it as a black box.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't need to understand the way the black box works. I just know that if I put this into it, I get this response.
Mm-hmm.
That's important. That's all that matters to me.
You can still test. You can still have an experiment about it. It's just like, I don't know. I don't know how this thing works. It's too complicated for us right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still too complicated.
That's true.
Ask anybody, like, what's the mind? It immediately goes to philosophy rather than science, because we don't have the science to be able to identify what the mind actually is.
It's true.
We don't even know where it is. Like, the best the best theory about it is that it's our nervous system now, but that's not even like
and he's like, we have to fight that belief, because the unconscious is the safest and healthiest place to go. And if you have this belief that demons or outside spiritual forces can enter into you while you're connected with the astral plane while you're sleeping, it creates this anticipatory response of fear.
I would have already sold my soul if that was the possibility.
Yeah.
I'd be
not that it's worth much for me, but I mean, my soul anyway.
I'd be much more successful if that was possible.
Deals with the devil, baby.
Yeah. Not only that, like that fear. What I would say is, like, the reason for the fear has got to be the overwhelming acceptance of evil, like, which is actually pretty antithetical to Jung's work.
Mm-hmm.
If there is this plane that everything is on and all things are there, and there can be this, like, download from it.
Which is the belief. You're correct.
That my unconscious mind feels like a slave to. It creates just so many possibilities of terribleness that I think Jung would have argued that how you said it, the unconscious mind is the safest place. It's like, that's why Jung was even against psychedelics. He was just like, don't make the unconscious mind do something that it's not ready to do. Famously
against psychedelics, which is very interesting. You wouldn't think he would be.
Well, with this idea of the collective unconscious, and in contrast to this astral plane, I think it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and so I think that's really why I'm trying to connect this story arc from Mesmer back to metaphysics, because the danger in that, and why I appreciate Benjamin Franklin, though tongue-in-cheek as he was, doing that is when we start to depart from what we know to be true scientifically and enter into speculation, we externalize what should be internalized. And the biggest problem for me with metaphysics, and this lucid dream researcher that I'm going to put in the notes, is when we start to say that there are demons attacking us or outside spirits attacking us, we misplace the truth that we're actually confronting our own shadow.
Yeah.
And we need to accept, like, those things that you're haunted by in your dreams are not things that are trying to hurt you from the outside, but opportunities to go deeper into the shadow of your unconscious that you have a responsibility to confront.
Yeah.
And metaphysics relieves a person of that personal responsibility by saying, you're being plagued by outside things. You need to go meditate and
do this thing
potion.
to get the medicine. Yeah. Well, and the other thing that it does that's a big problem is like, Jung, I forget where he wrote this, but he said nothing is bad in the unconscious mind. It's just distorted. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes scary, and it becomes a demon. It becomes a monster because it's so distorted from its purpose, its meaning for our psyche. And so it's not that's, you said so well with, like, the outside demon. It's like, that's bad because it puts me at the whim of this external thing. And if it's external, if it's internal, and it's my demon, then it's just like, hey, buddy, we gotta talk.
Yeah.
We need an integration.
Yeah.
That is seclusion. Oh man, I got so much research to do.
Yeah. No, I think you would have a field day in it. And I remember the name. It's Dr. Stephen LaBerge. It's a French name. He's French. But he's got an amazing lucid dreaming research institute in Hawaii.
Hawaii?
Yeah. And so we're
French
bringing
name.
people there. and he'll bring people there, and they'll do lucid dreaming research. And his contributions to our understanding of consciousness based on the altered state of sleep and dreams is incredible. I got the opportunity to see him speak at one of the international dream conferences, and what a weird dude. You would love him.
Yeah.
You would love him. He looks like, do you remember Kung Fu Panda and the turtle?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he looks like Master Oogway. He talks like Master Oogway too. Like just
That's
rambling
just
all over the place.
Stick my chin out, just.
Yeah. I don't think I like learned a lot from his lecture. I just like basked in him saying words.
You're mesmerized.
I was mesmerized. But yes, if you want to look it up, Stephen LaBerge, he's very staunch in his defense against, we cannot believe in the astral plane theory.
I don't like it.
There's no support to it either.
I'm sure there's more to it than what we're talking about right now, but the at least the fundamentals of it, I
Right. And back to our purposes today of ritual, hypnotic suggestion, anticipation, depotentiation, all hypnotic techniques that we're seeing regurgitated in this new age sort of theory. But if you go back all the way to ancient Egypt, we've been doing this for so long as human beings. And if you start to see the thread of continuity, it adds such a beautiful foundation and support for what we're doing in trauma work and trauma research and mental health and psychology with trauma-focused hypnotherapy. It's why I believe in this project so much.
Yeah.
We're continuing that thread of integrity that is critical to bring into the modern understanding of counseling.
There's a point. Every time there was a big resurgence and usefulness to hypnosis, it's because there was a new breakthrough in mental health.
And here we are.
And Jung didn't know the things that we know today about trauma in the nervous system.
Yeah.
Trauma in the mind. He couldn't have known that. The research wasn't there.
Well, and I need to say this. Sometimes I can feel a little bit embarrassed about being so grandiose in what I believe is our mission, but I believe that for me, and I know you share this with me, we have a responsibility to carry on the tradition and the efficacy of hypnosis in the modern age of discovery when it comes to psychology. Mental health has seen such an explosive growth over the past decade, and even more than that. And combining that with a long-standing, well-researched understanding of the unconscious mind and an effective way to address it with hypnosis is, I believe, my responsibility, because I've been gifted with this information and I need to bring it into this modern age. And so, though maybe 5 years from now, when somebody watches this video and we're still doing this, and our reach has grown so much. At the time of this recording, there are 14 subscribers on our YouTube page, and I'm very proud that our last video had like 17 views.
Nice.
And so when I say that I'm not ever going to quit with this mission, I mean that very sincerely, because I believe in it enough to face that blank canvas moving forward of maybe no one will listen, but I have a responsibility to speak.
I love it.
And so with that, love to know your questions. You've got some good terms to Google search if you want to deep dive more on any of these topics or historical notes. But that's an overarching view of how we've gotten today to our modern interpretation of trauma-focused hypnotherapy. And gosh, just the appreciation I have for the shoulders upon which we stand.
It's great.
Yeah, it's kind of poetic.
Yeah, I was mesmerized.
Yeah, it is.
I'll say that as many times in this as I possibly can.
I love it. Well, until next week, let us know what you'd like to see next time on the podcast. We'll talk about it. We'll chat about it. Hope you have a wonderful week. Until then, I'll see you. Bye.